Hi, everyone. So nice to see you. Thank you for coming out to the summer Montreal Books launch. For those I haven't met, I'm Rebecca West, the publisher and executive director of our parent association, the Association of English Language Publishers of Quebec. I think everyone should have signed in. That's one of the protocols in this beautiful shared building. If you haven't, please sign in with Marie. Grab a cold drink, and and books are for sale at the back if you don't have one yet. On behalf of the Montreal Review of Books, and on a more personal note, as a settler with ancestral roots in Ireland and the Netherlands, I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered in a place known as Jojage in the Kanien'kehá:ka language and Muniang in the language of the Anishinaabe. As a publication celebrating local books, we acknowledge the first storytellers of these lands. We're also super grateful to everyone at Teesri Duniya for having us here today. It's through this collaboration that we have access to this beautiful garden and backyard terrace. As always, I'd like to thank our amazing MRB team for putting this issue together. Our editor, Malcolm Fraser, is here, associate editor, Priscilla Jolie, associate publisher, Alexandra Swenny, our designer, David Leblanc, as well as our reviewers and illustrators. Many of our reviewers are here today. Say hi if you haven't already. Our collaborators at the Community Digital Arts Hub who are doing our live stream, as well as our board of directors. Our summer cover art is by Kaori Izumiya, inspired by Natalie Doonan's foraging-themed book, Eating the Urban Wild, which is for sale here today. And finally, I'd like to express thanks to our funders who really make this publication possible, the Canada Book Fund, the Canada Council for the Arts, SODEC, and Conseil des Arts de Montréal. We have a really great lineup, as always, of authors for you this evening, with three authors featured in the issue: Chanel Sutherland, Natalie Doonan, and Guy Rex Rodgers. A big thank you to Stephen from Paragraph Books, who's here selling books. If you haven't picked up one yet, please do. The authors will be around after the readings for signings. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming our editor, Malcolm Fraser.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks everyone for coming out. I'm always happy to welcome you here, and it is a pretty great issue, I think I can say in all humility. Thank you for coming on this weird weather day. It seemed for a minute there like it was too sunny. Now it feels like a storm is brewing, but we're safe here. We'll give you shelter. I want to introduce our first reader. Chanel Sutherland is a Vincentian Canadian writer of fiction and creative nonfiction. She won the 2025 Commonwealth Short Story Prize, which she was also longlisted for in 2022. Chanel is also the winner of the 2021 CBC Nonfiction Prize and the 2022 CBC Short Story Prize, and was named one of CBC Books' 30 Writers to Watch in 2022. Chanel lives in Montreal and is the author of Layaway Child, collection of short stories available over at the Paragraph Books table, and I'd like to welcome her to the stage. Welcome, Chanel. Is this a good height for you?
Can everyone hear me? Yeah, that's good. Thank you. All right. I just want to say thank you to the MRB. This has been a dream of mine to be featured in this wonderful publication since, I don't know, like many, many years since I was in university. So when I got the email asking, to do an interview, I was just blown away that anyone work for this organization would want me in it. And I was just saying to Rebecca earlier, it was one of my favorite interviews that I've done to date regarding Layaway Child, because Leia, who interviewed me, it was just a conversation between two people, the author and someone who had obviously read the book and engaged with it on a deep level. And I was able to have conversations with her about her experience, my experience, and it didn't feel like a conversation. So when I received a draft of the article, I was just blown away by what she had written, and can't wait to read it again, the final version of it. So thank you. The story I'm going to read is from the title story, Layaway Child. And I think it's going to be very self-explanatory. But for anyone who doesn't know what a layaway child is, a layaway child is a child who was left in the Caribbean in the care of grandparents, aunts, or family members while their parents came, in my case, to Canada to work and find a better path forward for themselves, and then their children will then join them. My mom came here and she worked as a nanny and as a housekeeper. And the layaway child title came from the first time I came to Canada. My mom took me to Zella's to buy a winter jacket because it was freezing in August for some reason. And she wasn't able to take the jacket home with her, so she put it on layaway. And that's when I realized there was a connection between what had happened to me and what she was currently doing. So, layaway child. The grown-ups never said a word when it was our turn, like it was some big secret we weren't supposed to know about. Just last summer, Vic Ross had woken up to freshly pressed pants and a dress shirt, neatly folded and stacked on a pair of shiny new shoes at the foot of his sleep mat. It wasn't Sunday, and as far as Vic knew, no one had died. When his auntie handed him a bucket of water and some soap and sent him out to the shed to wash, Vic didn't ask about where he was going. When she made his favorite cornmeal porridge with bay leaf and cinnamon sticks for breakfast, he still didn't think to ask. But something must have tipped him off, because one minute the morning was still night in some places, and the next, Vic's uncle was hauling him, kicking and bawling, from the house, across the yard, and into an airport van. From inside our house, just a few yards over, I could hear Vic braying like a donkey. "Auntie, please, no." At first, I thought nothing of it. Vic was always in some kind of trouble when he took his licks at the top of his lungs so that the whole of Purity Village could hear. I went about my business the same way I did every morning, folding my bedsheet and nightie, emptying the night pail, and then going into our front room to join Pops, Granny, and my little sister, Lena, for breakfast. Only no one was there to greet me, and the air in the house had a hollowness to it, like a deep hole had opened up and I was standing at its edge. Vic's pleading pulled me outside, where the sky was still black, with pins of light that blinked like faraway eyes looking down on us. I found Granny and Pop standing at our fence with Lena squeezed between them, sleepily sucking her thumb. By now, the whole street had come out to watch Vic screaming for everything under the sky. His dog, Jeannie, old McNeil, the village drunk, even our neighbor, Miss Rote, whom Vic reached out for even though he always taunted her and beat the flowers of her beloved plants with a stick. "Old Miss Rote does smell like goat. Old Miss Rote does smell like goat," he taunted. Miss Rote stood at the front of her yard wearing her good white dress, the same dress she wore to Easter service, and holding a bundle of red hibiscus whose petals she plucked and let fall at her bare feet. After the van had vanished down Bayside Road, carrying Vic and his screams to the airport, I started paying closer attention. The first thing I noticed was that none of the grown-ups seemed all that surprised. They stood around with blank faces, sniffling and clearing their throats, but not a single word passed between any of them, which was unusual. I noticed, too, that many of the women stood comforting Maeve Ross, Vic's aunt, who had been left behind. They held on to her, each pair of hands gripping some part of Maeve's body, like an altar skeleton providing support to keep her upright. I was shaken by what had happened to Vic, as was every kid I knew. We looked at one another with wide, wet eyes. Those of us whose faces weren't buried in the skirts of their grandmothers or aunties, and a silent question bounced through the air among us. Who's next? Vic was one of us, the bravest. We spent our days catching lizards, climbing trees, or lying on the ground, our back pressed against the warm soil, watching the clouds change shape as they moved across the sky. One time, a boy said he saw the face of his mother up there, and Vic got so mad he spat on him, a thick glob of white that slid across the boy's cheek and disappeared behind his head and into the sand. "You no have no mother, just like me no have no mother, and she no have no mother," Vic shouted at the top of his lungs. He was the kind of kid no one wanted to mess with, so we all kept our mouths shut after that. Of course, we knew we had mothers we were told lived overseas and would send for us one day. Until that morning, I thought it was a make-believe, something the grown-ups told children to frighten us into behaving. Most of us remembered so little about those women that the warnings were enough to scare us. It never crossed my mind that plane tickets had already been bought and a passenger van was on its way to carry Lena and me away from Purity forever. And now I want to do a small reading from the story that won the 2022 CBC Short Story Prize. It's titled Beneath the Softness of Snow. So you just heard from the children, the Layaway children. Now it's just a story that gives us a view into what goes on into the mom's mind, in the mom's mind when she comes to Canada. The room is filled with a foreign softness. It makes you uncomfortable. A menagerie of plush toys lines the inside of the crib. A shaggy carpet captures your footprints as you move across it. Even the lamp emanates a light so soft it barely casts shadows. It helps their eyes adjust, the woman tells you, and you try not to picture the single bulb hanging over the mattress back home. The night you left for Montreal, the bulb had swayed slightly, its oscillating beam casting strips of light on the little girl sleeping beneath it, revealing too many details to remember. You have two of your own, right? She asks, and all you can do is nod. For an instant, you become conscious of where you are, standing on a carpet softer than the mattress you used to sleep on. Beyond the window, the sky is a bruised violet. The trees are like dark skeletons stripped down to their bones. You are still not used to this change. You think of the cock and pullet tree in the yard back home, its large seed pods rattling like maracas in the wind. It does not shed its leaves to survive the season. You must miss them terribly, the woman says, and you watch as her lips form the word terribly. The brief pout of sympathy as she continues to lead you around the nursery, calling out things that are obvious. The changing table, the rocking chair, the mobile. You want to tell her that you have such things in your country, but it would not be entirely true. Before you moved to Montreal, these things did not exist for you. They were like shapes drawn with crayons. They were details you read about in letters or heard through the static of long-distance phone calls from your sister Paula. Juliet, you should see the baby's room. It's bigger than our whole house. Paula bragged about the belongings of her employers as if they were her own. She would use up an entire calling card describing the fur coats she tried on when no one was around, the name brand perfumes her employers gifted her for Christmas. Amid Mink and Elizabeth Taylor's white diamonds, she finally mentioned her son. Does he ask for me? Does he miss his mommy? You always lied and said yes, even though the boy had stopped asking for her and started calling his grandmother Mama. The night you left home, you begged your mother not to let your daughters forget. Tell them about me, you said. Make sure they know how much I love them. The woman turns to face you, and there's a look of apprehension in her eyes. You realize you have not said enough and force a smile. When are you due, you ask, jutting your chin out at the stretched fabric of her shirt. Not for another few weeks. She rubs her stomach in slow circles, and the gesture reminds you of a story you heard in your childhood about a magic lamp. We'll need someone immediately, 3 nights a week and the occasional weekend. You know there is more you should say, but you cannot bring yourself to find the words. Instead, you stare at the decal adorning the beige wall, a rainbow arcing up into white clouds then falling behind the crib. Look, do you even want this job? The woman asked, not cruelly, but earnestly. Because I get the sense that you don't. No, you tell her, I do, I want the job. Then tell me something about yourself. Anything. Why should I let you take care of my child? You watch her, this soon-to-be mother. There are things she wants you to say, things she wants you to surrender to her that are so fragile you fear that once you give them up, they will shatter. She laces her fingers across her bump, and her eyes light up. Why don't you tell me about your girls, she says. Something unfurls inside of you, sore and crusted as an infected wound. You let your mind take you to a place you only go when you're alone, where the tears flow like hurricane rain and taste like seawater. The words come and you let them surge onto your lip. You hear yourself say, Nadine and Elena, Lena. This is the first time you said their names to anyone since arriving in Canada. You never speak about your girls, not to the other 7 white women who would ask you questions about them, questions meant to expose some flaw that made you unfit to care for their children. Not to the women your sister entertains every Friday, a circle of mothers who have bonded over their misery after leaving their own children behind. Most of them have not seen their sons and daughters for years. Some have become attached to the children they're paid to watch. How old are they? The woman asked. And you press your heels into the carpet to keep from running away. 4 and 3, you say. Then, no. 5 and 3. Nadine just turned 5. Lena will be 4 in April. You can already feel the cracks. The woman shakes her head and looks out the window. I can't imagine doing what you did, she says, leaving my children behind like that. Your breath comes out as a silent cry that pushes through your lips, falling and sinking into the soft carpet under your feet. Outside, night crawls toward the room, but the snow makes everything look bright. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chanel. Stick around, of course, after the readings. We'll be having a brief Q&A with the authors, and look forward to discussing stuff. So our next author, Natalie Doonan, is a new media and performance artist, writer, and educator. She works at the intersection of visual art, sensory studies, performance studies, and cultural geography, focusing on food and the senses. Natalie's work has been shown in exhibitions and festivals across Canada and internationally. Her writing has appeared in professional and peer-reviewed art and food culture publications. She serves as associate professor in the Department of Communication at the Université de Montréal, and she is the author of Eating the Urban Wild, Food and Foraging in Montreal. Welcome, Natalie.
Is that good? Yes? Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here and very happy to see all of you who have come out. Thank you, Malcolm and Montreal Review of Books for inviting me, and to the other authors who are presenting alongside me. Very, very excited because this is my first book. And it's very different than what we've just listened to, because I'm used to publishing in peer-reviewed journals. I'm in academia. I'm an artist in academia, so I'm a little bit of an outsider no matter where I go. This book is about food and food communities in Montreal, especially along the St. Lawrence waterfront in Verdun. And each chapter takes the reader on a tour with different people, including hunters, fishers, foragers, community gardeners, citizens, activists, and I tried to tell their story. They tell their story through their own words. So I decided to read from chapter 5. A couple of reasons for this. So first of all, thank you to Gina Woolsey for the review in Montreal Review of Books. There's a quote that opens up that article, which comes from this chapter, and I also chose it because one of the things I love about seeing the book in print is my hand botanical drawings are in there in this chapter. So in the chapter, I'm taking you on a tour with Natasha Dani, who owns a business, Eco Gaia, specializing in medicinal and culinary plants that she also uses for aesthetic purposes, and Eugénie Potvin, who's a biologist at La Maison de l'Environnement de Verdun, and they're taking us on a botanical tour along the waterfront in Verdun. So I'm at page 87 here. Ambling along, the evening slipping fugitively away as the group becomes tangled in conversation, we stop to talk about the staghorn sumac that adorn the footpath. We spread out enough to make way for the bicycles that whiz by on the adjacent asphalt path. Natasha entices the group by commenting that the berries make a nice tart drink that resembles lemonade. Some call it sumacade. Like many other plants, however, it is potentially toxic. The fruit contains tannic acid and should not be excessively boiled. If prepared correctly, though, sumac is an antioxidant and a diuretic with antifungal properties. It can be used both internally and externally. Many people plant sumac ornamentally since it looks like an exotic tree with its fine, sharp-toothed, lance-shaped leaves and stunning, cone-shaped, blood-colored fruit. It is easy to find recipes online for sumacade. Natasha recommends drying the berries quickly so they don't become moldy to eliminate insects and dirt. Ground into a fine powder, it's a popular spice in Middle Eastern cuisine. Natasha also recommends a sumac-infused vinegar. The fruit has astringent properties and a bitter flavor. Its deep red hue is a rich source for dyes as well. Bringing us back again to less anthropocentric concerns, Eugénie explains that sumac, vinaigrier in French, plays an important role in retaining the soil and sediments. Our attention zooms in and out, from shrub to leaf to flower to berry to landscape and back. Out to the water, down to the compact earth below our feet, above to the tropical canopy enveloping us. we pivot and perceive in 360 degrees. From there, we move to sumac's neighbor, another plant of variable appreciation that is often dubbed a weed. Asclepias syriaca, common milkweed. Eugénie describes the importance of milkweed for monarchs. These butterflies can only lay their eggs on milkweed leaves. Monarchs migrate over very long trajectories from Canada to Mexico and are currently in decline. There are many projects underway to promote milkweed planting in support of monarch populations. Monarch caterpillars can only feed on milkweed, so this species is dependent on the plant throughout its life cycle. These are more than only human concerns. A keystone species, the thriving of monarchs is also directly connected to human health. If we wish to protect our own food sources, milkweed must be protected for monarchs. Milkweed pods contain latex, which protects the plant from predators. The pods can be eaten, but with great caution to avoid sickness and even potential death, particularly for people with latex allergies. Preparation for cooking involves a repetitive boiling process in salted water as a first step. More often, though, the plant is used externally to treat wounds. In the landscape, milkweed is an indicator of compact soil that is not well drained. In mid to late summer, the plant produces large, round umbels, pink flowers arranged in a luscious, spherical shape. This is attractive to many species. While here, many participants rejoice in the scent of this clonal perennial forb. In Quebec, certain microbreweries make IPA-style beers from local hops, with milkweed providing a nice flavor to such brews. It aids digestion and has a relaxing effect too. What's more, it's a galactagogue, promoting milk production in women. However, because it encourages estrogen, it can be dangerous for certain hormonal conditions. We are standing in an area about the size of 2 football fields. It is filled with milkweed plants. This site is unlike anything I have ever seen. Eugénie says that she recently spotted a rare bleu d'Europe here, a blue butterfly from Europe, first spotted in 2007 near Mirabel Airport, northwest of Montreal. This is one of 13 sites where the borough had stopped mowing the lawn, allowing a wide variety of plants to find their place. According to Eugénie, this renaturalization program has seen mixed support. There is still a lack of appreciation for urban biodiversity, which to some appears unkempt. Historically, says Eugénie, grass was seen as chic. To have the luxury of unused land that nevertheless demanded intense, underpaid manual labor was a demonstration of wealth. There's an ethic to Eugénie's aesthetic training, which moves us to perceive in new ways. The sun is beginning to set as we descend toward the riverbank. There we encounter burdock again, and a discussion emerges about whether it could or should be eaten from this place. Eugénie explains that the park area where we are located, between the river and the walking path that borders Boulevard La Salle, is human-made and constructed from backfill. The city discourages eating what grows in public areas, and she suggests that these precautions are a good idea, since the land is likely contaminated. This is significant especially when considering eating roots, which absorb whatever the earth contains. She offers that one alternative could be to collect seeds to plant at home. Some participants declare a contrarian interest in consuming the leaves and flowers of edible plants that grow in the park, despite, or perhaps in spite of, potential health concerns. The sky streaked with orange and hot pink, we move on, making our way toward the final stop at the garden of Thérèse Romer, who lives beside the river. What happens when we stop mowing the lawn? Asks Romer upon our arrival. This distinguished lady is advanced in age, and it seems she has no time to spare for introductions. To answer her question, we need flashlights to scan the ground. Several smartphones are promptly produced, and we illuminate the area before her, what she calls le pré fleuri. This unmown bit of land was renaturalized by the sole will of Romer. Fed up with the municipality's beautification program, she cordoned off a space that would be set aside for grasses and wildflowers, whatever happened to take root. She offers us wild carrot seeds from one of the interlopers. Otherwise known as Queen Anne's lace, this biennial can be harvested in the second year after planting. It is the ancestor to our domestic carrots. Romer explains that carrots came from Europe with the colonizers, who brought so many things, wittingly and not. Before dismissing the group, she impresses upon us the importance of visiting the Pré Fleuri repeatedly and regularly, morning, noon, and night in every season. To know this little place, it must be visited often. One must spend the time. And this is where we stop, she says. It is late. And I'm just skipping ahead a few pages to page 96, to a section called Learning the Grammar of Animacy, which comes from Robin Wall Kimmerer. In what ways are we transformed by encounters with other bodies? Language transforms our bodies too, through repetition. One way of coming to know about other species is to learn the names that have been attributed to them. Many times throughout the Balade Nature, participants asked Eugénie and Natacha to repeat the names of plants in English, in French, and in Latin, imitating the sounds, trying them out in their mouths. Rolling strange new words around our tongues, we develop muscle memory. Tanacetum vulgare, Arctium, Asclepia syriaca. Tanacetum vulgare, Arctium, Asclepia syriaca. Tanacetum vulgare, Arctium, Asclepia syriaca. Names become familiar through repetition. The sounds are domesticated in the mouth. A mantra. Do we venture to take the plants themselves into our mouths, to feel their textures too? Maybe, maybe not. I have personally incorporated plants through various means. They act and have acted on me in more ways than one. Rhus tifana, staghorn sumac, Oxalis stricta, common yellow wood sorrel, Daucus carota, wild carrot, and Salix alba, white willow, remain foreign to my body nonetheless. They retain an unknowable otherness for me, and I commune awkwardly with them, fumbling. Burdock brew, a post-industrial love potion. Lapa Lapa love leaves sesquiterpenes, beggars buttons burtop, bardana, burseed. Tinctures and extractions, salves and boiled for tea, cleanse the blood and heal the skin. Lapa Lapa please. Cuckoo button, cocklebur, cockle buttons, kisses. Predicting if one loves or not, Lapa never misses. Sticky Jack, Sweethearts, Tuzzy Muzzy, Herber. Arctogen and heal the cancer, Clotbur, stop the tumor. Flapper bags, donkeys, loppy major, gypsy comb, stimulate and strengthen prostate, uterus, and womb. Pig's rhubarb, fox's cloak, great burdock and harbor, isovaleric and caffeic acid, iron and sulfur, personata, happy major, philanthropium, amulet, smudge stick, incense infusion, syphilis, arthritis, rheumatism, rot, thorny burr, clot burr, hardock, touch me not. What do these plants have to teach me? In recording some of the plants that grew on the waterfront in Verdun in the summer of 2017, I am bearing witness to this life. That is not nothing. Green Squad employees of Maison de l'Environnement de Verdun patrol that waterfront regularly, maintaining inventories of the species that are taking up residence. Developing reciprocal relations with plants means engaging in a process of give and take, exchanging gifts. Importantly, as Kimmerer points out, we must not take more than what we need, always leaving behind enough for others. This is also part of the Freegan Creed, adhered to by a community of people who refuse the capitalist imperative of paying for food, choosing instead to dine from dumpsters and other places brimming with so-called waste. As climate change creates conditions favorable to the growth of monster weeds, we are facing a crisis in biodiversity. Many plants are not able to compete with hardy species that have been introduced too quickly to allow for a gradual adaptation and cohabitation. In this context, it seems to me that bearing witness to the life and death of plants is an act of reciprocity. For an artist, paying homage to diverse wildlife through poetry, drawings, photographs, incantations, and prose can be a way of communing and cultivating biodiversity. Michael Taussig eloquently demonstrates that the field is the site where self and other mix and mingle. It is the place of the abject, where one is transformed while being initiated into unfamiliar rituals. Drawing is a medium through which fleeting glimpses of otherworldly presences are registered in passing. What does it mean that certain humans are sculpting entire landscapes made of stuff so toxic that it is prohibited by law to consume the life that grows from it? What gifts might we offer in return to the plants and animals who grow in and from this refuse? How should we care for these disturbed landscapes that have been deemed too dangerous for food production? These wastelands still nourish many beings in many different ways. These places and the bodies of which they are composed also continue to spread contamination. Roots still clutch and branches still grow, and while the creative process always involves making cuts, severing one thing from its context, it also means making new connections, new relations. Who does one write for? For whom does one draw? By whom is one drawn in, drawn forth, drawn into? One writes for the spirits, says Taussig. The spirits draw the artist in. The hand is guided, the inner eye is activated, the ancestors, the plants, the animals, and all of creation. The artist sits quieted in equanimity in the eye of this storm, where all is channeled in and out and through. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And I wasn't expecting there to be Latinate incantations or chants tonight, so that was a very nice surprise. I want to introduce our third and final reader this evening. Guy Rex Rodgers arrived in Quebec as a young adult to study at the National Theatre School and was immediately enamored with and often baffled by Quebec's history, culture, and politics. Rodgers has been a writer, translator, filmmaker, and community activist, founder of the English Language Arts Network, ELAN, co-founder of the Quebec Writers Federation, QWF, and the Quebec Drama Federation, QDF. In 2015, he was appointed a companion in l'Ordre des Arts et des Lettres du Québec. In 2020, Rodgers began filming a documentary about waves of immigration and how immigrants successfully adapted to Quebec since it adopted the first language laws half a century earlier. His 3-year tour of Quebec as the government imposed harsh new language laws is the story of what we choose to forget. Available here. Welcome, Guy.
Well, thank you, Natalie and Chantal, for your readings. Thank you to Rebecca and Malcolm for featuring my book in the summer edition of the Montreal Review of Books. And I want to thank Tula Dramonis for writing the review, and you folks for coming out this afternoon. So my book began with a film. What We Choose to Remember is an oral history of Quebec that looks back at the previous half-century as a success story. What We Choose to Remember was the opening film of the Hudson Film Festival in May 2022. In June 2022, the Coalition Avenir Québec government passed Bill 96, claiming that French was in freefall, and if aggressive action were not taken immediately, Quebec would quickly become Louisiana. This gloomy diagnosis surprised a lot of Anglophones and Allophones. Normally, a documentary travels to festivals nationally and internationally, but my film is about Quebec. I wanted to show it to people who live here and are part of the story. Not every community has a movie theater, but they all have a community center or a school gym where they can screen a film. Between the summer of 2022 and December 2024, I was invited to screen my film in 55 communities, and every screening was followed by a conversation with the audience. After showing What We Choose to Remember at the Hudson Film Festival and the Knowlton Film Festival, the first screening of what would become an extended tour took place in the community where the first English school was established after the conquest. I've asked many people where they think that first school might have been established. They often say Quebec City, Montreal. The first school was established in Gaspé. And why was the first English school in Gaspé? During the 1750s, when the British Army marched from Acadia to Nouvelle-France, the entire Gaspé Peninsula was depopulated. After the conquest, the region was repopulated by British loyalists from the US and fishermen and traders from Britain and the Channel Islands. At the time of Canada's first census in 1871, the Gaspé population reached 1,000. Population changes are an important part of this story, so we created statistics from Canadian censuses. In 1871, Gaspé was 72% English. Half a century later, in 1921, it was still 57% English. In 1921, it was down to 20%. In 2021, it was at 11%. One woman in Gaspé spoke of being born to a unilingual Anglophone parents who bought a house on a street inhabited entirely by Francophones. To ensure that their daughter mixed with the other children, the father built a playground in the backyard for all the neighborhood kids, thereby ensuring that his daughter had friends and that she became fully bilingual. Not all parents have the resources or the vision for such an ambitious project. Other families are bilingual. A man told the story of his 5-year-old describing her linguistic identity to her teacher. My father is English, my mother is French, and I'm a mixed-up kid. My film explored waves of immigration. The tour made me discover layers of settlement. If you look at a map of the greater Montreal area, you see rivers and you see lakes. All of the oldest settlements in Quebec are located on water. When most people think of the Laurentians, what do you think of? Skiing, Mont Tremblant? The first Laurentian communities were established on water. One of the oldest towns is St. Andrews on the Ottawa River. Now known as Saint-André d'Argenteuil, it was the birthplace of Canada's second Prime Minister, Sir John Abbott. St. Andrews sits at the mouth of La Rivière du Nord, which will take you inland to St. Columban. It was the first Irish settlement in Quebec in 1810, decades before the potato famine. The next layer of settlements came with railways and bridges. The Victoria Bridge was erected in 1860, and St. Lambert was the first station on the south side. It quickly became a prosperous town and is sometimes referred to as the Westmount of the South Shore, and not in a good way. A man at the St. Lambert screening shared a story about working for King's Transfer Van Lines in Griffintown. When the other workers asked where he lived on the South Shore, he would always say, I'm from the Park, meaning Greenfield Park, which is a good working class area. He would never mention that his actual home was in St. Lambert because it was perceived as Anglo and wealthy. Commuter access to the South Shore for the less wealthy families became possible in 1912 when the Montreal and Southern Counties Railway laid 80 kilometers of track from Old Montreal to Chambly on the Richelieu River. The names of the new stations located in half-cleared bushland were whimsically inviting, with names like Sunlight City and Highland Gardens. The commuter train gave the South Shore quick year-round access to the island, enabling working-class Montrealers to escape the smelly city, seeking fresh air, green fields, and parks. The reality was slightly different. The jerry-built houses along unpaved streets were modest and working class, sometimes barely shacks. Most of the people who came to my screenings were old enough to have witnessed many of the events of the previous half-century. I also had the opportunity to show my film to students in high schools, cégeps, and all three of Quebec's English universities. I was visiting the schools as the CAC was fixing the problem of too many foreign students speaking too much English on the streets of Montreal. In March 2023, you'll probably remember, rumblings began in the media denouncing a shocking scandal in education. Le Journal de Montréal reported that Quebec was spending $1 billion on free English universities to anglicize Montreal. This was the political climate when I visited McGill. The first student to speak after the screening was from Ontario. He said, as soon as I started to think about university, I wanted to come to McGill. Montreal is the coolest place in Canada. I thought after university I would stick around and become a teacher. I did a stage, and the vibe I got in the school was that Quebec is becoming an unwelcoming place. I did French immersion, so I speak French. But could I have a future here? It is disappointing because of how cool I thought Montreal was. The McGill students understood the small population of French speakers, surrounded by multiple millions of English speakers, whose language dominates international business, politics, education, entertainment, and tourism, will naturally feel vulnerable. They also understood that Quebec's economy is dependent on immigrants, and it is important that they learn French. The students who were planning to stay in Quebec already spoke French or were committed to acquiring the language as soon as possible. The CAC made the situation feel like a lose-lose proposition. They were regarded as a problem if they didn't learn French, but they were still a problem if they did, because they were contributing to the bigger problem of bilingualism. The last two chapters of the book return to Montreal, and there were 10 screenings here, and I look at the major immigrant communities, so the Irish, the Jewish immigrants, and Italians. The Irish screening was in Point St. Charles at the library. The conversation in Point St. Charles was mostly a celebration of immigrant courage, persistence, and success, but it ended on a bleak note. The Irish community in Montreal has become part of the mainstream and has dispersed all around the city. Much of its unique identity has been diluted. The Irish in Quebec are still a favorite immigrant group historically, but the living, breathing Irish descendants have become English-speaking aliens. The youngest man at the screening said, "Growing up here in the 80s and 90s, I always felt like an outsider, being told, ici, on parle français." There was a lot of anger amongst the Francophones in the neighborhood, and I was blamed for it, but I didn't know why. I understand that Francophones feel threatened in North America, and I understand that recent immigrants are struggling to get a foot on the ladder, but it seems shitty that the only people who don't have any rights here are Anglophones. I need a job too. Most of the people at the Côte Saint-Luc Library were Jewish. The first people to speak after the screening pursued the theme of history and institutions. A man said, "I hear people say, why is there a Jewish General Hospital? Why do the Jews have a big fancy schmancy hospital? They think it was a gift from the government. We built it with our own donations because Jewish doctors couldn't find work in Christian hospitals. Legault and his fans need to understand this." A woman said, "I came here from France after the war, but because I'm Jewish, I had to go to an English school. People don't know that. They disbelieve it when you tell them." The Italian immigration story is particularly interesting because they were mostly Catholic, and they spoke a Romance language similar to French. Italians were one of the immigrant groups most likely to work in French, to adopt French as their home language, and to marry Francophones. In 1930, 63% of Italians were enrolled in French Catholic schools. By 1970, only 11% were enrolled in French Catholic schools. So what happened? Did Italians reject French Quebec and join up with the Anglos for economic benefits? That was the belief at the time of the St. Leonard crisis in 1969. It was also the belief that motivated the language laws of the 1970s, that immigrants would choose English unless they were forced to attend French schools. The Italian version of the story is somewhat different. Thousands claim they were denied access to French Catholic schools and were forced to attend English schools. They wanted to learn French, and most of them did learn French, even if they went to an English school. And many of them, because they struggled with French their entire lives, made sure that their kids got a better start in French immersion or in French schools. This is a great success story that has never been recognized as part of the official history of Quebec. So I'm going to end here just with a little bit of an excerpt from the prologue to the book. Few nations tell the truth. They prefer stories that make citizens feel good, tales that make the nation's youth proud of their ancestors and confident in their future. Quebec's narrative is unusual. It is the story of a conquered people, dominated for centuries by foreigners. At first glance, it appears to be a history imposed by the conquerors, the English. In fact, the popular history of Quebec has been astutely constructed as an inspirational underdog tale. Against impossible odds, A scraggly mutt fights for its rights, dignity, culture, and beloved language. It's a good story. Great heroes are defined by the power of their enemies. Asterix's village had to battle the invincible Roman Empire. Quebec had to fight the two most powerful empires the world has ever known, Great Britain and the United States of America. The British invaded, oppressed, or exploited almost every country on the planet. I spent my young adult years in Australia, founded as a penal colony for Britain's political and social riffraff. My Aussie mates deeply resented arrogant, palmy bastards. And how many countries have not been exploited by American empire? Quebec's underdog story has a ring of truth. It was perfectly plausible to me that the British and American empires had conspired to subjugate Quebec's habitants. When I first moved to La Belle Province in 1980, I bought into the story and could have been persuaded to paint my face blue and white, like Braveheart's William Wallace, and gallop into battle shouting, "Freedom!" I learned to speak French and found a Francophone partner. We lived in French neighborhoods and sent our kids to French schools. We bought our first house in Rosemount, near Montreal's Botanic Gardens, far east of the St. Lawrence Boulevard, the traditional divide between Montreal's French east side, and the English-dominated west side. I wondered if I was the first Anglo ever to venture so deep into French territory, until one day I came across an English church. And then I discovered an English school still operating. How is this to be explained? I discovered that Rosemount had been home to more than 100,000 English speakers in the mid-20th century. Neighboring Hochelaga, the heart of the French-speaking working class, also had English schools and churches in the 1950s. Those Anglo communities are smaller now, but they formerly thrived. So why are immigrants told that the territory east of St. Lawrence has always been French? A few years ago, I moved to Outremont, the traditional home of Quebec's Francophone elite, and was puzzled by street names that sounded more like Edinburgh than Paris: McDougall, McNider, McCullough, and Stewart. I was surprised to learn that Outremont in the 1930s was 50% English, and that the first pioneers were all Scots. A century earlier, the entire city of Montreal had been more than 50% English. These were startling discoveries to me. Very few nations tell the truth about their past. Quebec is no exception. Quebecers want to feel good about themselves and their fight for survival. The problem with the underdog tale is that it requires a villain, a big, bad dog of a different breed. This is not a tale of unspeakable violence. There are no horrifying villains, and sadly, few inspiring heroes. It is a simple human story about fear, vulnerability, and tribal defenses. This is a story of lovable underdogs, all struggling to preserve their histories, languages, and cultures. Their tragedy is what they have chosen to forget about themselves and about each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guy. I would like to invite all of our featured authors up on stage. We have this kind of talk show-like setup here. It looks like I might have to move the bench slightly forward to not get rained on. All right, thank you, Tyler. So I'll start off with a question for Guy, since you just read and it's fresh in our minds. I appreciated reading about all this Anglo history in Quebec. Early in the book, you raised kind of the specter of the angry phone. The angry, resentful, bitter Anglo who bashes Quebec even though they stay here. And you kind of present it as almost kind of a straw man, I would say. Were you concerned at all about coming across that way with this project?
Of course. I mean, when we first released the film, we made a trailer. And the question was, do we keep it sort of neutral and make it seem really boring and historical? Or do we go for the FLQ crisis and make it seem really, interesting? And whenever you talk about language in Quebec, there's a division and a polarization and a defensiveness. And at one end, you have a certain type of francophone who does not want to admit that Anglos have been here like for a long, long time and contributed to building much of Quebec. I mean, that's something I knew I would have to deal with. The other thing is the mythical angry Anglophone who write letters to the editor, but I don't very often encounter them in real life. What I did with the film, though, was to open it up to public groups and have an open mic session at the end. So at several screenings, people would say, they're going to be out tonight, they're going to be out tonight. And if you have a mixed crowd of francophones who are kind of listening to this story with a bit of skepticism, but perhaps sympathy, and then you get some ranting, raving, angry phone saying, we should have burnt the place down 100 years ago. It doesn't set the right tone. But out of 60 screenings that I did all around Quebec, and quite a few in Montreal, none of that. I mean, one screening when I was really warned, there are some people here tonight who are going to be loud and angry. After they saw the film, all they talked about was their ancestors and their own sense of belonging in Quebec in a very positive way. So, yeah, I considered it, was prepared for it, but I've yet to encounter it.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear. My next question is for Chanel, and I found your stories very poignant and moving. In the first story in the book that you read a little bit from earlier this evening, you describe stepping out into a cold, hard Montreal winter, something we've all experienced, though it seems distant right now. And you say in the second person that you use in the story, you are once again struck by the dishonesty of this place. I wondered what you meant by that.
Well, that story it's not my story. It's the story of a mother who came here. So it was very inspired by my mom's experience. And so in that passage that you just cited, she looks at the snow and she sees waves. But she understands that it's not waves, it's cold because she's far away from waves. She sees fireflies where the snow hits the light. So it kind of speaks to the dream that's sold to, I think, young women, especially young men as well, from small villages like mine, a village where there's no electricity when I was growing up, no flushing toilets or anything like that. And so you're sold this dream, like you come to Canada and then everything works out for you. But the reality is a lot of us, they come to Canada and we're met with resistance because we speak just English where I come from. I'm from St. Vincent. So there's that. And then there's also the fact that there are not a lot of opportunities available to us. So many of the women who come from the Caribbean to Canada, to Montreal, at least from my community, they work as nannies, as housekeepers, as cleaning ladies. A lot of it is under the table, so they're not official. They're not recognized as official workers. And there's a lot of racism and microaggression that comes with that as well. So it's this idea that they come to this place that's promised to them, that's this dream that's promised to them, that's sold to them, and then when they get here, it's the opposite. It's completely different, right?
Right.
Yeah.
My next question is for Natalie. You talked before about being an artist in academia and feeling like an outsider. And when I was speaking earlier with Gina, who wrote the piece for the new issue, we were talking about how your book is so different from your average academic book. I mean, it has sort of a journalistic angle. It has drawings. It has personal stories, and so I wondered, how did you? I want to say, how did you get away with that in an academic context? And what were your supervisors or authorities' take on this multidimensional approach?
Yeah. So the book was not. Is this? Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay. The book was not from my thesis project or anything like that, so I didn't have any supervisors to contend with, luckily. But it was a struggle for sure, because I publish with I was publishing with McGill-Queen's University Press. It's a peer-reviewed publication, so there are certain expectations around supporting claims with academic sources. But then at the same time, it's very important to me to be readable and to try and be interesting and accessible. And I work in various different forms too, like in performance, in multimedia, and audiovisual work, for exactly that reason, trying to reach different audiences. So I think there's kind of always an aspect of multivocality or plurivocality in the work that I do, but I have to say it was a struggle trying to balance this kind of academic voice with the more poetic voice and telling stories and incorporating, because I did a lot of interviews for the book, so incorporating people's stories and then storytelling about the outings that I did, for example, with a couple of waterfowl hunters in the middle of the St. Lawrence River right in front of Montreal. So yeah, it was a struggle. It wasn't easy. It's something that I talked about with my editor and something that came up in the peer review process too. So it had to be worked. And I have to say, it took me almost a decade to do this book. And I think a lot of the reason was because of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's part of what makes it so interesting, though, I think.
Thank you.
I want to open up the floor to questions from anyone here, if anyone has questions for our authors. No questions? I see over here. Yeah, hang on one second. We're going to bring a microphone over so that you can also be heard.
I have a question for Chanel. I enjoyed your readings, and what always fascinates me about short story collections is how the author arrives at the order. Was this a complicated or easy process for you?
Ooh, it was a collaboration between me and my editor. So this collection wasn't, the stories are interconnected now, but they weren't always so. So during the editing phase and the editing process, we found a way to connect them. So if you read the collection, there are three main characters, main girls, and then there's three stories around each. And the order kind of follows their arc, I guess, their growth within the collection itself. And obviously, you see characters repeat in different stories, in each other's stories. So we had to find a way to connect them so that they make sense, so that we're not giving anything away too soon about another character that was coming up. It was daunting, but it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that part of it.
Any more questions? Yes, Nivaid. Just hang tight. We'll get you your mic.
Hi, thanks, Malcolm. I had a question for Guy. I wanted to ask if you could speak a little about the process as well, about the translation of film to book, and what that journey was like for you.
Well, this is my first book, so the whole book experience was a new thing. I had no intention of writing a book. In fact, I had no intention of doing a tour. Usually when you make a film, you get 1 or 2 screenings, a few festivals, goes on to YouTube, that's it. Because of the political moment, the film resonated very strongly. And I was touring around Quebec, places that I'd been to before. I'd been to the Gaspé before. You can occasionally see a an English street name, but you don't see the English-speaking community. They're not visible. I've been to Sept-Îles, I've been to Baie-Comeau, but unless you're invited there by the community, you don't meet them, you don't see them. So as the tour kind of went on, I started seeing it in terms of geography. I mean, I'm understanding Quebec in terms of the water, the railroads, the layers of settlement, the evolving demographics. So, and I spent a lot of time on the road, you know, in buses and trains and cars, and the story just started to form itself in my mind. And I thought it was just so interesting that I wanted to share it. So I had no publisher lined up. I just wrote the book. I mean, I finished the tour in December 2024. During 2025, I wrote the book, and then I just decided that I would publish it through ELAN, and the response has been extraordinary. That it was a book that just felt like it needed to be written. I had no plans for it, but I'm happy I did it.
Do we have any more questions? John, hang tight. We're going to get you the microphone.
Hi, this is a question for Natalie. I'm wondering about the focus on Verdun in your book. Why Verdun? Is it because of the organizations there, the geography, or something else?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So there are different answers to that, and the very first one is because it's where my dad and my grandfather grew up. My great-grandfather moved there when the community was just established. So it was because of them and their stories. I was asking them stories about food related to the neighborhood while they were growing up, and food memories. But also it's sort of, I think of it as the colonial heart of the country in a way, because when Europeans came down the St. Lawrence River, they were looking for a route westward for trade reasons, for commercialization, and they were blocked when they got to the Lachine Rapids. They were not able to cross the rapids, which is why the Lachine Canal was built, to sort of contourner that situation. And then the old port of Montreal is right nearby too, and it's one of the most important commercial food hubs in the world. So I thought it was a really fascinating location for a food tour. And also because I was interested in a kind of DIY food tour, moving away from certain tropes that you see in culinary writing. So, you know, very often when you read books about Canadian cuisine, it's a tour across the country. It's visits to high-end restaurants and chefs and, you know, designer kitchens and stuff like that. And I thought, well, and one of the things that inspired me was reading Lenore Newman's book, Speaking in Cod Tongues, where she does that, but she comes up with 4 qualities of Canadian cuisine that she says are kind of eponymous. So it's local, it's seasonal, it's multicultural, and it's wild. So I thought, what if you take those 4 qualities and just look at it at the neighborhood scale, and instead of doing a horizontal analysis, do a vertical sampling and really do a deep dive and find out what those things mean for people in one specific community, if anything. So I often, you know, didn't direct the conversation towards those things, but tried to kind of see whether they were aspects of the food that they would talk about. So thank you for that question.
I think we found the common thread of themes. We always go for a diversity of literary styles and approaches in the books we review and the books we choose for these launch events. And during the readings, I was thinking, I don't think there's a common thread here, but I think I've found it. It's the colonial and post-colonial history. So thank you for threading the needle for me. Are there any more questions? Rebecca.
I've got the mic. So my question is for Guy. I'm just curious if you have screened the film, or I mean, I know that the book and the film are based English language projects à la base, but yeah, curious if you've had any reception or reaction from French language Quebecers, or if there's a plan to translate the book, perhaps, since it does seem to deal so much with
Good
this
question.
relationship.
The film had a French dubbed version very early on. And I was curious to know how Francophones would feel about the film. So when I first launched the film at Hudson, a journalist, José Legault, contacted me, wanted to see the film. I mean, I've known José Legault on and off for a long time. And so she called me up, and I've known her for long. She said, "Do you know who I am?" So I said, "Yeah, I do know who you are." And then she said, "Do you speak French?" "Yeah, I speak French." You know, these are two tropes that Anglos don't know anybody in the Francophone media. Anglos don't speak French. And then she grilled me about why I made the film. You know, what was my political agenda? What was I trying to prove? But when I explained it to her, then she said, "Well, actually, I really liked your film." She said, "I work in English and in French. And when I work in the English area, I hear a lot of people demanding their historical rights, their constitutional rights. When I work in the French media, I see a lot of digs at Anglos, you know, the old cliches." She said, "What your film does is show real people just living their lives, marrying Francophones, learning French, sending their kids to French schools, or not. It just felt like a real sample of life." She said, "I'm going to write a review about it." Never did. Which is okay. You know, I figured, okay, she got busy. Her editor overruled her. I hired a publicist who sent out communique to all of the Francophone media, not a word. And then she actually called some of her close personal friends and said, "Could you tell me, like, why?" And her friend said, "No." There was a wall of silence, and you know, I eventually found out that the mortal sin that my film committed was to speak highly of bilingualism. And in certain circles within Quebec, certain nationalist circles, the greatest bugbear of all is bilingualism, to make it openly something that we celebrate and acknowledge. And as I was writing the book, I was at an event. A friend of mine received a King Charles medal, and this familiar-looking face sauntered across the room, and he said, "You're the guy who's been making those films about Anglos, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah," and it was Jean Charest. And he said, "So what kind of response have you been getting from the Francophone media?" And I said, "Zero." He said, "I'm not surprised." He said, "What you're talking about is so appealing, so sympathetic. I mean, the characters in the film are likable. They're not angry Anglos. They're nice people. They really care about Quebec. The film is threatening because it shows an aspect of Quebec. You're either pro-French, pro-defending Quebec, or you're against it. This idea of just being happy in French, happy in English, bilingual, proud of their mother tongue languages, it's a threatening concept." He said, "But stick with it. Eventually, it's an important conversation, and it needs to get out there." So just to the final part of your question, I have 1/3 of the book. I have excerpts. I mean, kind of like what I did tonight was excerpts. So enough of the excerpts that any Francophone who wants to read it is going to go, oh, I want to know what happens next. And they'll either read it in English or help me find a Francophone publisher. Yeah.
Well, I hope that happens, because I like the dialogue that you started. I think we probably have time for one more question, if anyone has one. Going once, going twice. Well, thank you all so much for coming. Of course, our authors are going to stick around, and we hope you buy a book, and if you're friendly to them, maybe they'll sign it for you. I wanted to just we all had to sign in coming here, and we also have to sign out. And if you came in through the front door, we're asked that you also leave through the front door. Although, okay, if you came through the garden, you don't need to sign out. If you came through the front door, you should sign out at the front door. But it looks like the rain has stopped, so you can walk around in the garden, hang out with the rabbits, and stick around and have a drink with us. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you to our authors.
Thank you.